Who would have thought that in our rich country, we use hunger as a weapon?
It's much more difficult to be left-wing than to be right-wing, you know, because the history of the left is full of lies and betrayals.
Art has to be subversive. If you don't have a level of anger about you, then stay at home, you know.
What I tried to do is to turn my own life into a weapon to challenge and to question social violence. One of the main issues for the people of my childhood was that we would always be dismissed as fictional people. My name is Edouard Louis. I'm the author of 3 books about poverty and the working class in which I grew up.
I've made films for about 50 years or more. I'm a man of the left and have been since the early 1960s.
I want to thank him for his life of dedication to social justice.
Ken's movies are about people like me, about poverty, about the working class, and really they spoke to me like nothing before.
Otherwise, you're just going to end up like... Well,
What, like you?
Seb.
Do you really think I want that? Really?
Yeah.
I'm interested to meet Edouard because his writing is very extraordinary and has experienced hardship and aggression at first hand.
Ken Loach is one of the artists I admire the most on earth. He's a hero for me, so I can't wait to meet him and have this conversation with him.
It's a public meeting. He is a different generation to me, and will see the demands that the left needs to make maybe differently. So I think there's a lot for us to talk about.
I'm going to start. In my last book, Who Killed My Father, I tried to talk about my father and about my father's life. And the fact is that my father, when he was 35, had an accident at the factory where he was working, and when his father and grandfather were working before. And he could not work for several years. And after that, the French state kind of harassed him to go back to work, so basically telling him, if you don't go back to work, you will lose your benefits. And in fact, this book was much made possible and inspired by your movie, I, Daniel Blake. Wow. And I have the impression that the focus of your movie of Daniel Blake is political and social persecution. And I think in the left, in the past, and till today, and it's still true in a way, but we talked a lot about social exclusion as being one of the main tools that oppress poor people and excluded people. But what I feel from my father's life, for the character of Daniel Blake, or it's even more true if you think about people of color who are being persecuted by police brutality, police force and everything. And do you think that persecution as a political tool is a modern tool of conservative politics?
It's a huge issue. I mean, it's a really good point. I think it begins with economics. Work has changed so that, and there is a lot of precarious work, and a lot of it is very badly paid, and the minimum wage is very low, and there are now ways of not paying the minimum wage. So people have to be made so they will take bad work for low pay. And one way to do that is to make it so that if you're not working, you really suffer. And even if you're not working because you're ill or you're disabled, it still has to be better to take a rubbish job on poverty pay than to be supported by all of us. But I mean, they say by the state. Actually, it should be all of us. You know, because we live together, we look after each other when we're in trouble. So therefore, it's certainly true, I think, in both our countries. For us, the benefits system is punitive. You have to apply for non-existent jobs for 35 hours a week. If you're an hour too short, you'll be sanctioned. and then you're sanctioned, and then you don't get your money, and then you get into debt, and then you can't pay the rent, and then you might be evicted. So that the threat of that is so dreadful that, yes, I'll take a badly paid, insecure job just to not be in that position. And there's a cruelty in that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we call it a conscious cruelty. Because they know there was a case. Oh, I could talk forever about this. I mean,
you should.
Well, I mean, a man in a job centre in Wales, in Llanelli, 65 years old. He was ill. His doctor said he couldn't work, but they forced him to work. He sat in a chair and he collapsed, and he died. And it's gone on week after week, month after month, day after day. Who would have thought that in our rich country, we use hunger as a weapon? And the rise in charity food, as well, 2/3 of food banks, there's an organisation called the Social Trust. They gave out 1.6 million charity food banks last year. Over 500,000 of them went to children. Children can't eat. I mean, we live under a government that treats people with absolute contempt.
Well, yeah, what we've seen in your movies since the very beginning, people are dying, you know. And also this is the very truth of what politics is, that you can die. In France, if you are a working class person, you have 50% more chance to die before 65 years old. Wow. And it goes the same. If you're a woman, you can die from masculine violence. If you are a queer person, you have like much more chance to kill yourself. As a gay child, I always had ideas of killing myself, and it's very banal, you know. It's like what so many gay people, LGBT people share. It's the same thing if you're non-white, if you're black, if you're an Arab in France, you can be killed by the police. So really belonging to a certain category means that you are exposed to a premature death, you know. And it's very bizarre because the people who have that power to either kill us or rescue us spend their time hiding what politics really is, you know. And we have to make movies or books or art in order to show what they do and what they hide while doing it. And I think that's also why your movies are so powerful, because they're showing this truth. Like people die from politics. And then you cannot have like just a calm, quiet conversation about politics, because you are talking about people who don't live anymore.
Yes, I think what pollutes our politics is that the public discourse doesn't reflect the struggles that people have. It's a propaganda machine. Almost the entire press is on one side. And what used to be thought of as a kind of mildly left paper is now not left at all. But I think it's in writing, like your books, that you can find your voice. But that voice should be in our mass media. It should be in television. And you don't hear voices like yours. Or if we do hear your voice, it would be marked with a health warning, you know, which happens to all of us.
Also, there is something that I wanted to discuss, because I'm not sure we agree on that.
Okay.
Which is I wrote about this small village that used to be an industrial village in the north of France. So basically, all my family was working at the factory.
Yes.
And I saw the bodies of my father and my grandfathers and all the people around me in the village. I saw them suffering so much from working at the factory, you know, being like physically exhausted, being physically humiliated even all the time. And so nowadays, when I watch the news on TV and I see that like a factory is closing in Europe, I can't help having a little like joy, you know, in saying, I don't want people to do this anymore. And for me, the responsibility is to the state to give money to these people who don't have jobs anymore, to, you know, organize. There are so many new ways of doing politics, tax on the robots, tax on the capital, tax on the market, tax on... And I think this is the real issue. And sometimes I don't understand the left where they are saying, like, we should save our factories and everything, because I don't want people to do this job.
No, but I think there are two things. On the one hand, you don't want to do dirty, dangerous, exploitative work. But equally, I think it's a natural instinct. What keeps us engaged in society is everyone makes a contribution. Everyone joins in, everyone's got a function. And then you have a sense of self-respect and pride, and that's my contribution. And I have a presence, I have a function. And I think that's very important. So everyone
it can be other forms. That's what we traditionally call work. Absolutely. It can be people creating like soccer teams, dance classes,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So, but this is not recognized by the state as a work most of the time.
No, I agree. But I mean, what happened to the mines in our country is a classic example of that. I mean, mining is, if any job is dirty and dangerous, mining is. 8 hours a day underground. My father's family were all miners, apart from my father. And my grandfather's a miner. And he was a kid, so not a job you'd want your child to go into. But they had amazing communities. And when the mines were shut towards the end of the 80s and the 90s, when Thatcher, consciously took on the miners to beat them because of their militancy and their strength, those communities were just left to rot. Now, in a proper society, you'd find a new investment. You wouldn't leave people with nothing, so that the community would be protected with a useful function. Instead of, as happened with capitalism, it's, OK, the capital closes down and the money goes somewhere else.
But at the same time, these communities can be difficult and they can be toxic. And growing up gay in a working class milieu, it was extremely difficult for me to be part of that community because this community didn't want me, So right. I wish the community was less strong at that time. But I understand your point and the fact that when people are left isolated, they don't go to unions, they don't go on strike and everything, which is an issue. But what is the solution? Because there is something very violent and very difficult about those communities also. And today we have an opportunity to create, other communities that we were not born in, like through the internet. I didn't choose the community of my childhood. And I don't want capitalism to destroy communities, but I want to be able to escape a community easily if I want, So.
Yeah, that's a fair point. In general, I think people are more tolerant, and the means of communication, like the internet, have broadened people's expectations now. But I think people are generous when they feel secure, and they're more narrow when they feel insecure.
That's true.
And whether it's a village or whether it's a city, I think it's generosity of spirit comes out of security.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I think it's part of it, and also it's a. I think it's not everything. I think there are still some mechanism, of racism and of masculine violence that are a part. But it is also true what you say about insecurity, and I think we see it from your movies, the fact that when people live in insecurity with constant social violence coming, on them, on their shoulder, they end up being like tensed, a little bit. Yes. It happens that sometimes we have a bad day at work and a bad day with and we go home and we are being a little bit aggressive, even with someone we love, And we say, why did I do that, But because you suffered in the day and then you have like this violence becomes part of your flesh and parts of your being.
No, exactly. I mean, it comes from stress, doesn't it? When you're at work, you put on a smile, you're in the world, you present a public face. When you get home, and if you have worked a long day, then you don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's when the pressure comes out. And that's when, I mean, we've just been working with precarious workers, drivers working 12 hours with no break at all, just to get a living wage. And same for care workers, and many other people doing in the gig economy. And then the stress of economic, have you got enough money, at the end of the week? Means that when you get home, you don't have patience with the person you live with, you don't have patience with the kids, you haven't seen the kids. And that's where the stress comes from. It comes from economic hardship, I think.
Yeah, no, it does. When governments make violence decisions, they create kind of circle of violence because people who suffer from violence will repeat sometimes this violence and this is makes it even worse.
I'm sure people have some thoughts about the things we've been talking about.
Hi, I had a question about representation. So I work for Hope Not Hate. We're a group who campaign against the politics of hate. And we hear from people who face a lot of the problems that you both look at in your work. We hear a very kind of strong sense of voicelessness. And people often articulate that through a narrative about a kind of suppression by PC culture. And this kind of, it's a narrative of the populist right, but it speaks to a sense of kind of being trapped by rules that you were not part of creating. So I guess the question is, how then do you find your own voice?
I mean, one way is to be part of an organisation, be part of a union, because then other people will be sharing the same concerns that you have, and you can articulate it in a benign way, not by simply, you know, reheating the prejudices that you get through the right-wing press. But yeah, I think be part of a group, a community group, a football team, I don't know, anything where there's a group of people. And then the best tends to surface.
What is important is to create spaces where people feel comfortable, where they can speak. And I think those spaces can be a movie, an organization, an association, can be a book, it can be a place, a political party, so many different things. You know, it's what your movies did to me, you know. There were spaces in which I could say, I suffered, and people around me suffered, you know. And I think it's extremely difficult to get there. When I published, I talk often about it, but when I published my first novel, The End of Eddy, talking about poverty and my life in the north of France, my mother came to me and she told me, why do you say we are poor, you know? And she didn't want me to say that. She didn't want me to say it because actually she's ashamed of being poor, you know? Because the governments and the people in the governments make her believe that if she's poor, it's because of her, that it's her fault, that she's responsible for that. So at the end, she doesn't want to say I suffer anymore. And it becomes a huge political issue because if the people who suffer don't want to say that they suffer, you know, how can you change the world and how can you make it better, you know, if people don't want to say I suffer?
Hi, so I've worked with the homeless for over 7 years, and what do you guys think about homelessness in the UK, as we are one of the richest countries in the world? And do you guys think the government care about homelessness?
They care about the housing market. They don't care about homelessness. And the idea that the market will provide homes for people, of course, is false, because they've been built and sold as investments for people to buy them, not live in, because they will increase in value. Whereas, as you know, probably better than me, last Christmas, 130,000 children were in temporary accommodation. And I don't want to be party political. Well, I do want to be party political. But the idea of building council houses that are built by the municipality, health centres and schools, and make life a joy to live, you know? And I think it's the only way. But we won't get it with this government, as we know.
Yeah, the situation in France is pretty much the same. There are people in the streets everywhere. And there is also this constant state of lies in the political field saying we don't have money, we can do that because we don't have money. And of course the money is everywhere, you know, it's just that they are in the hands of a very few people. Have you ever seen a child seeing a homeless person for the first time? The kids are so shocked the first time, most of the time. It's like, why this person is sleeping on the street like here? And this violence becomes so normal, you know, and we all accept it in a way, and that frightens me. But how do you force these people in the governments to take action and to change this situation? They don't care. They think it's normal. They think it's not a problem.
I think we have to get rid of them.
Yes, of course.
They won't change.
Yeah, clearly.
I would be interested to know what you think about the role of technology in movements, which at the moment we are seeing are really changing the face of politics. For example, Hong Kong, for example, Chile, for example, Extinction Rebellion. That's one question. The other one is the role of empathy, because watching your films, has always allowed me to feel for those who I don't know.
Golly, big. I'm the wrong person to answer that because I can barely turn my phone on. But I think clearly it can spread the message. It can communicate with a great number of people who are stirred by the same campaign, the same ideas. I think the problem is that you have to move on from that because otherwise we don't know how to effect the change. You know, unless you can analyse the forces that are driving us to disaster and how we intervene against them, how are you going to proceed? So I think it's got to be tied to political analysis, and I do think it has to be tied to an organised, coherent political movement, whether you call it a party or not, I don't know. I think in our case, I think we still do need a party. I mean, we've had huge issues with parties, and the Labour Party is a classic example. It's been led by people who were committed to making capitalism work, you know, and just getting the crumbs off the table. So that the interests of the working class have not been represented in our apparent democracy. The second part, the role of empathy, I shall pass to you.
No, go.
Empathy comes, I guess, from solidarity action, doesn't it? Where you say, right, I'm not in that exact struggle, but I will withdraw my labour in sympathy, because then you can say, OK, you're on strike, you're absolutely right, the issue that you face will come to us unless we join with you. And then we can use our strength as a class.
Just briefly about new technologies. When in France there was the Yellow Vest movement, people protesting against social violence, against poverty, against the French state, there was a massive reaction from the dominant class, who hated these people in the streets. You know, they couldn't bear it, and they were saying, "Oh, look at these people! They are dirty, they are ridiculous, they are fat, they are stupid, they are." And at that time, like in the mainstream media, it was extremely difficult to talk about what was going on. And the social media were a place where you could address things. And I wrote a text about the Yellow Vest movement, and I put it on Twitter because I thought it's the only place where I can, you know, say what I have to say. And social media and new technologies are an example of that, of we can use power against power.
And your position on empathy?
I'm more comfortable with the idea of confronting people and making them feel bad in place of empathy. You know, I want art to make people feel bad in a way. I love it. I want people to see Ken's movies or Darden's Brothers movies or, you know, Barry Jenkins movies and say, what do I do? You know, what is my role in this violence? And if I do nothing, I should feel bad about it. Look at what these people are going through. But what interests me is to really use art to make people feel uncomfortable. You know, it's the very, you know, role of art. And nowadays, sometimes people say, "Oh, I feel uncomfortable. I don't feel safe." You hear it a lot in the US, in the academic milieu, or in the media sphere. But being uncomfortable is what art should do. You know, make you feel like, what are you doing against that? You know, to confront you to your non-action, to what you are not doing. And it's what I hope.
The rise of the far right. It's a huge threat because it's hiding the interests of big corporations behind a kind of phony nationalism and populism.
I think it's a beautiful thing to put security in the mouth of the left and to say, when we talk about security, we don't talk about repression, we talk about helping people.
We are at such a critical moment now, with struggling to find a radical, progressive way of living together.
In France, if you are a working class person, you have 50% more chance to die before 65 years old.
The public discourse doesn't reflect the struggles that people have. It's a propaganda machine.
How do you force these people in the governments to change this situation?
I think we have to get rid of them.
Yes, of course.
They won't change. one thing that we mentioned before we started was a problem that's really across Europe and in the States, and that is the rise of the far right. We'll have different experiences in this, and how the left should respond, why the right has risen in the way it has. There's Vox in Spain, there's Le Pen in France, Salvini in Italy.
Bolsonaro in Brazil.
Yes, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and there's the eastern countries. Poland has got a right-wing, far-right government and so on. And it's a huge threat because it's hiding the interests of big corporations behind a kind of phony nationalism and populism. Why do you think it's arisen in France, and how should the left respond? There's a simple question.
Very easy. I will answer in 2 words. No, I'm kidding. No, I think you are absolutely right, and that it's really frightening. In fact, in the village where I grew up, many people were voting for the far right. So I not only I tried to understand it, but I experienced it like through my flesh, like physically. My father was voting for the far right. My mother, like my family in general, was voting for the far right. And the thing they would say was always the left doesn't care about us, anymore. They don't talk about us, and they would say the far right are the only ones who talk about us. They are the only one who address our lives, our bodies, what we are going through. So certainly, like, one of the reasons why the far right is so powerful today is the fact that most of the so-called left, the socialist parties all around Europe, like Parti Socialiste, SPD in Germany, Labour in England, they basically stopped talking about poor people, about work, about pain, about suffering, about class, and so they renewed the language and erased these people. So many working class people felt that they didn't have a space anymore in the left where they could speak, and so they slowly went to the far right. I think also one of the maybe more complex things is sometimes the inability for a certain left to not address very contemporary issues, because we see in your movie, the last one, Sorry We Missed You, that the son of the family, the young kid is like 15 or 16 years old, is revolting against how the world is working, And you see the same thing in France. There are so many people from the younger generation. My brothers and sisters are 19, 20 years old, and they are not the same that my father used to be, For example, they don't want to have bosses anymore, They don't want to have hierarchies anymore. They don't want to have hours anymore, like a strict schedule where they go to work and everything. And for me, it's wonderful, For me, it's a revolutionary vibe, People saying, I don't want a boss threatening me, humiliating me, giving me orders and everything. And the fact is that most of the left is unable to talk about it. And only the right and the far right say, okay, we are going to do Uber, we are going to do Deliveroo, we are going to break, the work contracts and everything. And the left has been unable to try to find a left-wing language to that. What it means for us if we have a new generation of people like this young kid in Sorry We Missed You, who says, I don't want to have a boss anymore. It must be the most beautiful thing for us, left-wing people. And we really need to renew the language of the left, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the left really was their prime interest was in making certain business work. It wasn't the interest of the working class and their security and their income and their work. And I think the last point you make is very interesting. And I mean, it's called flexibility here. And
that's the right-wing language for that. That's why we need to...
But it would work well if it's flexible on both sides. So that the worker can phone up and say, sorry, boss, I'm not coming in today. No reason, but I still want to be paid. So it only works in the interest of the employer. And I think it's fine when you're young that you have a kind of fairly casual relationship with work. But when people have families and they have bills they must pay, then they do need a secure income. And you can't have a secure income unless you've got a secure job.
Because we don't have another system, right?
Yes.
If we build a better system with more welfare and with more, protection, we could imagine a world where we find not flexibility, but an liberty,
Yeah,
freedom.
well, it's fine. I mean, maybe in cooperatives or collectives.
Absolutely.
So that there's got to be a coherence to it, I think. But I think the biggest problem with the left, well, in our country, it's identified its interests with the employers. Mm-hmm. And what is remarkable here is that the Labour Party has done a 180-degree shift when Corbyn was elected leader. And now they are talking about the interests of working-class people. We talked about right at work, like a health service that'll really, you won't have to wait months for an operation, and so on. Social care, looking after old people, and with some dignity. Everybody, getting a wage they can actually live on. Investing in those areas that have been neglected and which are left wrecked. And they are talking about that now. And also about protecting or trying to mitigate the effects of climate change and turning that around. The other problem is the abuse and the smears and the lies that are told about someone of the left trying to instigate those changes. It's very intense. So I think that's a big issue. But in a sense, I agree with you that we have to find a new language to reinterpret the basic demands that people have, really.
Mm-hmm. And I always have the impression that, people like my father was at the same time voting for the far right, at the same time saying, gay people should be killed and everything, these very violent things against gay people. And at the same time, when there was a gay man assaulted by a group of other guys in the village, my father went there and helped that guy, gay guy, and said to the others, you don't touch him or I destroy you,
Yes.
And so I always have this feeling that people always have so many different people within them, And so all these people who now vote for the far right, and sometimes we say like very violent things against gay people, against what they call migrants and everything, like these people, they have others possibilities of being inside themselves,
And I think you bring that out very well, actually. I mean, you show the contradictory impulses in people, and I think that's very precisely done in your writing. And it's the same person will be both generous and irrationally harsh. And they don't understand why they're being so brutal. But they're contradictory elements. I think that's very true. But in a way, you want a system that brings the best out of people.
That's why if you build a strong left, you will push people to go on the other direction, like the better possibility of beings that they have within themselves. You will drive them to go that way and not the other way. And eventually then the violence will disappear or something. Like.
Again, I think it comes out of security, isn't it? If you're secure, you can be generous. If you're not threatened yourself, you can welcome people who need help, whether they're seeking asylum or for whatever reason, or there's issues within people in your community. If you feel good about yourself, then you can be generous. If you feel frightened, if you feel in danger, if you feel hopeless, if you feel cynical, then you push people away.
So how would you interpret the fact that the dominant class have this security and they are not necessarily welcoming?
Because they can only maintain their security by keeping everybody else down.
That's the answer I
mean,
wanted.
they're taught to rule. That's how they control the empire, isn't it? By keeping the indigenous people in their place. And here it was keeping the working class in this place. They couldn't afford to be generous, because that's what their wealth depended on. But that's why we need a different kind of society based on equality, brotherhood and liberty.
But also I have this feeling that it's extremely difficult to rebuild a new left in order to fight the right-wing rise. And because I have the impression that today, in a way, the far right already won the battle. People always ask me, "Do you think that the far right can win the elections in France?" And I always answer, but they already won, you know, because they are everywhere. Because as soon as they say something, it will be everywhere, you know, in the media, on the front page of all newspapers. So you just have to say basically a very stupid racist thing, and it will be everywhere. So there is like a kind of fascination for the far right in the public sphere.
I think you're absolutely right.
And when you are doing left-wing things and you are trying to say new things, like, it doesn't have the same effect, you know? They create the discussion, and we are supposed to answer that, you know? It's everywhere, on TV, in the newspapers, on the radio. There's the question, and you are constantly invited to go and to discuss their issues.
Yes, exactly. But at one level, it's quite simple, the process. And we have a far-right press here. Most of the press is on the far right. So that it's the public discourse, as opposed to what's going on Twitter and Facebook, I guess, is dominated by the right-wing agenda. So that when somebody from the left goes on, they don't take their ideas, they're asked to comment on the right-wing agenda. And the mechanism, that control is very clear. I mean, our press is owned by, I don't know if it's the same in France, but the press is owned by very rich tax exiles who don't live here. They own the press, and they tell us what to think. I mean, one thing we do have to do is have a policy for that. Not to defend the freedom of the press, but to establish the freedom of the press.
I think I agree.
I mean, another interesting point is the left and how we regenerate it.
The thing is that it's much more difficult to be left-wing than to be right-wing, you know, because precisely the history of the left is full of lies and betrayals and of people pretending to be left but not being left, you know. When people say I'm right-wing, they are really right-wing.
Yeah, that's true. This is true.
Even if they are worse than they think most of the time. But let's open up the conversation again.
Yes, absolutely.
Should we?
Yes. God, we stirred up a few things, I hope.
Both of your work tend to deal with working class protagonists. I think one of the greatest successes of Kes was the fact that it had this fantastic outreach and was a reference point to everyone in the 70s. Everybody sort of knew of it, even if we hadn't seen the whole film, we knew of it. But is your work, Ken, still able to have that same outreach? Is it still accessible, or even will working class children still be able to know about I, Daniel Blake, or Sorry We Missed You? No wonder, Edouard, is your work still able to access the sort of working class or middle classes that say, Kes did back in the 70s?
I mean, I think that as an artist, you should never take it for granted, and you should always try to make this work visible and hearable and accessible to other people. And that's why it's very important as a writer, as a director, to go in the streets, to demonstrate, to be part of like political organization, to go in different contexts, to go to high schools, to talk to the students. And I think it's never enough to just do a book or a movie. You have, I think, as an artist, a responsibility to try to engage a conversation beyond that. You were talking about rich people, why they don't care about poor people. It's because it's the interest, because they are rich because some people are poor. But it works the same way with culture, you know. Some people have culture because other people don't have culture, you know. Some people have diplomas because other people don't have diplomas. And everything is linked to this kind of primal exclusion. So I think if you really want to be a progressist and a left-wing artist, you have to try to question that and to try to undo this fact that the very definition of culture is the gap between people who have access to it and people who don't have access to it. And going in the streets, writing text in the media, going to talk like this with people is a way of overcoming it a little bit.
As regards the film, I mean, you only get one Kes in a career, really, that lingers on like it did. But the last two films, we've had what we call community screenings, where the film can be hired by, you know, a community group or a trade union or a church hall or room above a pub or whatever. You can have it quite cheaply, charge for admission, keep the money or give it to a campaign or a charity. And it gets to the areas where people would not go to an art house cinema, even if there were one, and there isn't one. So, and we had nearly 700 community screenings of I, Daniel Blake. which is a completely novel thing. You know, the films could be shown outside cinemas, and it was amazing. And with this new one, they're going to try and do the same thing.
I think you both embody the answer to this question, but I think I'm going to ask you, in an age of crisis, what do you think is the value of art?
Value of art? Well, first of all, art should be anything. It should be what the imagination produces. You know, I mean, the moment you start saying art should be this, or it should work in this way, or it should, you know, then you kill creativity. And you end up with Stalinist art and all that, or you end up with tawdry commercial art. But I think what we can do, if you're lucky enough to make films or write a book or whatever, is you can uphold the principles of how we live. You know, the great humanitarian values of equality, fraternity, and liberty. We can just say, look, these are the principles of how we should live.
Mm-hmm. I think art will do better if we criticize arts more often. You know, when for me it was very strange when I arrived in the cultural milieu completely by accident. Like when I started to write my books, I met so many people in cinema or in literature, in publishing, and they thought that they were progressists and liberals just because they were dealing with arts, and it's not enough. You know, movies have been excluding poor people, have been excluding black people, have been excluding, you know, like gay people for so long, you know. And so when Toni Morrison, the Afro-American writer, wrote Beloved and so many other masterpieces, when she started to write about black people in the US, it was against the mainstream definition of what art should be, of what art was and is. And so I think also we should always challenge the idea that art is good as such, you know. You do good art if you're angry at art also. And sometimes art can be just a tool that the bourgeoisie will use to feel good about themselves, you know. Oh no, you know, I do art.
This is so important. It's so important. I mean, the last thing we want is a picture gallery sponsored by an oil company, isn't it? And I think that art has to be subversive. And you're dead right. If you don't have a level of anger about you, then stay at home, you know, because you've got to connect, haven't you? You've got to connect to the feelings people have, and one of the great pillars of radical politics is struggle, and you learn through struggle and you create through struggle. And as you're right, there's an establishment in the literary figures and an establishment in the films and in theatre, and they're too comfortable.
Exactly. And so sometimes they are even worse than the money people, because they're just so sure about themselves. And they are so sure that they are on the good side forever, you know? Yeah. So we have to challenge them.
I'm so pleased to hear you say that. I really am. Excellent.
This is more for Edouard. You spoke a lot about making people feel unbearable as a means for making them change. Why that as opposed to inspiring people to change?
I mean, for me, it's part of the same thing. It drives the same. It comes from the same source, and it's the same energy. It's because you find something unbearable that you will be in a position where you have to find the inspiration to make the situation more bearable by definition. And so I always found that the most difficult books, the most violent books, and the most violent movies and the most difficult movies were always the most beautiful in a way, because they were showing reality, you know, they were showing things, and it was unbearable, but then it creates within you the energy to do something else, to do something different. And if you think about the gay movement, if you think about the feminist movement, if you think about the Marxist movement, they were making very sad statements, saying we are living in a state of alienation, we are living, you know, as a woman, you are being subjected to violence and everything. And then you have to change it. Our world is violent and ugly, and you have to show it in order to inspire people to change it, because it's the way it works. It's finally you see reality. When I see Ken movies, I think I finally see reality, and finally I see, and it's not beautiful. People are suffering, people are going through difficult things, but it gives me so much strength. Your movies are beautiful because they are sad.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, we're not just flattering each other, but I mean, there are moments of tenderness in your books which are inspiring, I think, and there's a gentleness and moments of tenderness, and that's what inspires you.
I always forget to talk about it, but yes, it's true. Ken is doing the job, talking about tenderness.
I would like to ask, like, what is the sustainable safe space for minority people, for example, who cannot adjust to school or like a company, like society, you think?
It's very complex, but for sure we need to flip the script and get rid of our actual governments, because it's not going to happen within these governments.
No.
We need some very strong policies to create spaces for people who are threatened, like in many different ways, as women, as people of color. I think there are so many things we can invent, you know, but it will happen only if we change things.
The idea that everywhere is dangerous, but you need one small safe space is nonsense. I mean, every space should be safe. I think it comes back to security. If everyone is secure and doesn't feel threatened, then we are tolerant. But it's embedding that into our daily routine, into where people work and where they go to for relaxation or whatever.
I love when you talk about security, because in France it's talking about security is very often like a right-wing thing, because when people talk about we need security, they think of like police and army and all this stuff. And I think it's a beautiful thing to put security in the mouth of the left and to say, when we talk about security, we don't talk about army, we don't talk about police, we don't talk about repression, we talk about helping people, about welfare, about social security. Political agenda of security is beautiful, also for the question of minority, you know, as gender, sexual minorities. The question of security is extremely important, and security is a beautiful word.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it has two meanings, absolutely. But since we're coming to the end, what we've been saying really leads up to, I think, the fact that we are at such a critical moment now, with struggling to find a radical, progressive way of living together. And you express things very clearly and very precisely about why we need it. In our country, we're in a slightly different position to where you are in the rest of Europe, in France and other countries, because we do have a mass party of the left that would make big changes. The question is whether that will happen or not. And whatever happens when the choice is made, that we mustn't stop these advances. We mustn't give up the possibility of living together collectively. I know the word has different... but it's got a political significance in that it must reflect in the details of how we organise our lives. But the guiding principle is, what is the common good?
I think that people should try to change this situation, should go and vote to change this situation. I wouldn't talk about common good, because my goodness is against the wellness, you know. So it's not a common good. It's the good of the people who suffer against the people who have everything. But
then can't we change them having everything, so that we share it? Really?
We will see.
I always looked at him as the vulgar face of a declining empire.
I think when we make the decision to stand up for ourselves, the powers that be, they react.
We have a deep state that do whatever they want, to whoever they want, whenever they want.